and go from sharing experiences to strategizing together, identifying with other partners in development the important trends that we were going to face. And that resulted in going from the live learning experiences that we facilitated into the cities are listening experiences. As you know, we have been calling for the international community to listen to us, to listen to the local action. And now we know as well, there is no single sphere of government, no single actor that can face the challenges that we need to face alone. So here we are in a cities are listening experience, which we hope will lead to actually policy shifts and influencing each other's work programs. I am delighted to welcome you to this high-level dialogue on how development is going to be looking like and how we need to think about development. In the COVID era, we are not in the post-COVID era yet. It looks like it will be a while. And at the same time, I am delighted to kind of celebrate over 2 decades of work of our capacity and institutional building working group, a permanent working group in UCLG that gathers practitioners from local government associations, from local governments around the world and regional governments as well, that are very active in actually development cooperation activities. The CIB working group has been very critical for us in different things, but if I could mention three periods which are significant for the discussion that we're going to have. CIB has been powering a lot of the thinking around association capacity building and the importance of making associations strong around the world as counterparts to national governments and communities. It has also played a significant role in the discussion around aid effectiveness. I don't know if we remember, but already over there in Paris, we were discussing how that should look like, what aid effectiveness was, and how it should be not donor-driven, but driven by the countries, by the recipients. We brought to that discussion around the Accra agenda, the localization of development, and the CIB played a very important role in the inputs that United Cities and local governments brought to the working party on aid effectiveness and all of those discussions. We have several policy papers and briefs that I would urge you to read. And all of these under the leadership of VNG International, the Dutch Association of Municipalities, with very strong inputs, of course, from the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. And I would say with time, we have become a true community, a true community of practitioners that brings the voice of associations to our network, to the worldwide network of local and regional governments. So this is a group that has thought a lot about what we are going to discuss today. And I would say we have gone through a couple of foundational moments. I think the Accra the Accra agenda was very important for the work of this working group. I think COVID might be another foundational moment for us as well. It is certainly the case for the World Organization. The World Council has just agreed to work towards a pact for the future, building on the social contract that can be shaped around the SDGs. I will tell you more about it later. But this is the community that we are discussing with, and of course, I am delighted to have the Development Partners Network on decentralization and local governance supporting these exchanges as well. So we'll talk a bit about the challenges around this discussion in a short while, but I would like first of all to thank our co-president, Jan van Zanen, the mayor of The Hague, and the chair of the Dutch Association of Municipalities for joining us. Jan, thank you for being here, but also for the championing work that you have done in United Cities and local governments around association building, around peace building, and around the full discussion of how we should tackle development from a universal perspective. So please, Jan, can you frame the session for us a little bit?
I will try my utmost. Thank you, dear Emilia. Dear friends, let me begin to say to you, I miss you all, but still we are a communion from the local up to the top. And I hope we'll meet again soon and we continue to do so. I'll stick to my official text now. Dear colleagues, dear friends from local and regional governments, dear representatives from national governments and international donor organizations, dear friends. Over the past months, it has become clear that the crisis caused by COVID-19 will have lasting effects all around the world. Every region and country has been hit, and the effects are felt hardest at local level, at our local level. The local recovery will need to be about building resilience, ensuring democratic principles, and promoting decentralization to ensure the viability and sustainability of local and regional governments in the future. UCLG membership strongly believes that local government development cooperation is one of the key instruments to tackle the challenges ahead of our society, from climate impacts to social impacts, and of course, and we know them all, health issues. Moreover, development cooperation by local and regional governments can help achieve the Sustainable Development Goals at home and abroad, also in this renewed context. And I think that will be an agenda I believe really in, we're all working on, and an agenda which requires our continuous commitment at all levels. Today, we have gathered representatives from local governments and their associations that implement development cooperation programs at local level. We have welcomed many representatives from national governments and international donor organizations to this digital table, which is great because this way we can have a real conversation among different stakeholders. It is important to have this conversation with all of you to ensure that we agree on a joint way forward within development cooperation and that the available funding reaches the communities that need it most. I will leave it here to make room for all your contributions and look forward to a fruitful conversation. Thank you very much. Carry on and stay healthy.
That's a promise, Co-President. Thank you very much for those encouraging words, and most of all for being a true champion of associations, associative movement, collective learning. I guess this is what we are about today. Allow me to exchange with you to give you a few framing ideas of the challenges that we think we are facing and how the World Organization is looking at this very discussion. Well, it is important to realize that for the first time since the inception of the Human Development Index, the world is facing a decline in human development. And it's important to signal this out because, I mean, all of us know the world is suffering. These are trying times for everybody, but I don't know whether we are actually measuring or being realistic about the dimensions of these challenges. The United Nations and the World Bank are looking at the following figures, which I think are very important. Over 100 million people will face a decline into poverty as a result of COVID-19. Up to 250 million people could suffer from extreme hunger and food stress. The shutdowns will imply that hundreds of millions of people, particularly from the informal sector, will be suffering most. And we need to realize that 80% of all employment in the world is about the informal sector. Also, middle income countries are going to be suffering a lot, particularly because their economies are tourism driven, and 2 billion children will not be able to attend a school. For the first time, we are also facing a notion that leads us to think that development is not only about the global south, right? Or the global north, or the east and the west. It's about everybody. And we are also starting to realize that that common denominator, the weakest link, the most vulnerable, are really our reference to measure how strong our societies are. And this is in particular true because for the first time, it is health that is making us make that measure. And in health, that weakest link is one of the most important indicators. So in this reality, and as the co-president was saying to us, knowing that our territories will never be the same, we need now to rethink how important development cooperation is. From our perspective, and the CIB has a joint statement on this, which I urge you to read, it remains not only relevant, it is really critical, because most of the challenges that we are facing, we can only face if we do it together. And we are not talking about the vaccines, but we are also talking about the transformation that we will need to trigger in order to be resilient and sustainable. Just two thoughts that I would like to end this framing with. It is probably the comeback of the commons, of the public action, of the public goods. And this will entail a total reshape of development cooperation, of partnerships. We will need to think about this together differently, particularly because we will need to think about the global commons, which is another concept that is extremely important. And if we think about the commons, public service provision will be critical. And defining a development cooperation system that protects the local service provision will be very, very critical for us, and particularly for this group, which has focused on local action. I would also like to bring up, if you think this line of thought is correct, then the role of local government associations is going to be extremely important, and decentralized cooperation will need to get a different place in international action. So I'll stop here, because I know many of you are going to be talking about these things much better than I do, but we are struggling with these things, and we are trying to translate the vision of our leadership, which has been reflected in our decalogue for the post-COVID era, into shaping our partnerships for the future. So with these introductory words, I leave the floor to Lucy Slack, the Deputy Secretary General, my dear colleague from the Commonwealth Local Government Forum. We share a lot of history together, Lucy, and you have a tougher job than me now, moderating this first very rich, very interesting panel. Up to you. Good luck, Lucy.
Thank you very much, Emilia, and thank you also, Mayor Van Zanen, for the excellent framing for this session. So as we know, this event today brings together local government practitioners, but also some of our development partners. And I think this is a really critical conversation for us to be having. We have a fantastic panel, and I know you have definitely come to hear them, not me. So I'm going to move straight along to our first speaker. This session is going to really look at the role that local governments are playing and have played in the COVID-19 crisis worldwide, but also how COVID-19 is impacting on development cooperation and what our vision is as we look forward, what we expect may need to change and to be done differently. So thank you for that framing, Emilia, and let's hear now from some of our speakers. So our first speaker is Geneviève Séverin, who's the director of Cités Unies France. She's going to speak in French, so you all know that there's interpretation available for those of you who need it. And I have two questions for you, Geneviève, and I'm going to put them together in the interest of time. So the first is really, how have French local governments, both and also the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs, responded to the COVID-19 crisis, both at home and abroad? And what effects of the crisis do you see sort of related to that that's going to impact on development cooperation? And what changes do you see to ensure that local government is part of that process going forward?
Merci beaucoup, Lucie. Bonjour à toutes et tous. Bonjour à toutes et tous et ravie d'être avec vous. Merci pour l'invitation. Alors, pour répondre à ta question, Lucie, peut-être je vais commencer juste par dire qu'en France, donc, la coopération décentralisée en France, donc notamment la coopération au développement, hein, puisque la coopération décentralisée est plus large qu'uniquement l'aide au développement, est inscrite dans la Constitution française, hein, au regard des lois de décentralisation. Donc, c'est une possibilité, une compétence qu'ont les collectivités françaises. Et environ 6000 collectivités françaises pratiquent la coopération décentralisée, dont la coopération au développement. Et elles le font en direct, sans forcément avoir ni d'opérateurs, ni d'associations relais. Et elles mobilisent en gros 1 milliard d'euros par an, donc en fonds propres des collectivités locales, sur la coopération internationale, ce qui correspond à la fois à l'aide au développement, à l'aide humanitaire et à l'aide aux migrants. Tout ça est repris dans l'enveloppe. Alors, deux éléments par rapport à la question que tu m'as posée. Le premier élément de réponse a été notre surprise, notamment pendant le premier confinement, notre surprise face à l'énorme demande d'international qu'ont manifesté les collectivités. On pensait, on imaginait repli sur soi, on craignait le repli sur soi, on craignait, voilà, le confinement fait que chacun s'intéresse à ses propres sujets. Et on n'a jamais eu autant de demandes de collectivités, d'échanges, d'informations sur les questions internationales. Donc, on a animé énormément de réunions, beaucoup d'élus ont participé, beaucoup plus que d'habitude. Et beaucoup ont souhaité rejoindre les réseaux et à la fois s'engager encore plus dans l'international. Ce qui veut dire que, à la fois côté des collectivités et côté gouvernement, côté des collectivités, elles ont maintenu la totalité des crédits qu'elles avaient votés pour l'action internationale et pour l'aide au développement, mais elles les ont réorientés. Au lieu d'aller sur des projets qui impliquaient des déplacements et autres, l'aide a servi à acheter par exemple des masques, du matériel, à verser de l'aide d'urgence à des partenaires internationaux. Et côté État, l'État a maintenu, donc l'État français a maintenu la totalité des financements qui étaient prévus pour les collectivités, hein, puisque au sein du ministère des Affaires étrangères françaises, il y a un département qui est chargé du soutien aux projets des collectivités territoriales. Donc, les budgets ont été maintenus, ils ont été réorientés avec beaucoup plus de possibilités, beaucoup plus de souplesse pour les collectivités dans l'usage des crédits, y compris sur des objets qui n'étaient pas prévus au départ, de l'aide d'urgence, de l'aide médicale, de l'aide sanitaire, etc. Donc, l'année 2020 a été, à cet égard, assez exceptionnelle, avec beaucoup de projets de collectivités et à la fois l'État souple et réactif et les collectivités elles-mêmes souples et réactifs en maintenant les budgets qui étaient prévus. Le deuxième étonnement qui a été le nôtre pendant le confinement a été la solidarité sud-nord. Les collectivités françaises, alors beaucoup de collectivités françaises ont des partenariats au Sahel notamment, mais aussi en Corée du Sud, en Amérique latine, etc., en Chine, et beaucoup de collectivités françaises ont reçu de la part de leurs partenaires africains des messages d'encouragement et de solidarité face au nombre de décès en France et face à la situation sanitaire en France. Et ça, c'était inédit, c'est-à-dire que les partenaires, les associations de collectivités du Mali, du Burkina Faso, etc., venaient apporter leur soutien et leur solidarité aux collectivités françaises durement touchés par la maladie. Et ce sont les partenaires chinois, vietnamiens, coréens qui ont envoyé à des grandes villes comme Bordeaux, Toulouse, Lyon, des masques, du matériel sanitaire pour faire face à une pénurie que la France connaissait en tout début de confinement. Donc, c'est énorme demande d'international des collectivités et en même temps, inversement du rapport nord-sud et soutien et solidarité du sud vers le nord. Et ça, pour beaucoup de collectivités, beaucoup d'élus, ça a été extrêmement surprenant et extrêmement enfin, ça les a beaucoup interrogés et ça les a confortés, je dirais, dans leur volonté de partenariat en se disant, voilà, il y a une égalité d'intérêt et d'ambition. Ça n'est pas que de l'aide au développement, c'est aussi de la solidarité du sud vers le nord. Donc, c'était vraiment deux enseignements importants. Et nous continuons pour 2021. La grande question en 2021 est le maintien des budgets. Le ministère des Affaires étrangères a annoncé que l'État allait maintenir les budgets d'appui aux collectivités dans leurs projets à l'international. La grande question sera le maintien des budgets au sein des collectivités, puisque les régions, les départements, les villes vont devoir aussi réorienter une partie de leur budget vers l'aide au redémarrage économique. Mais en tout cas, on a tenu nos rencontres annuelles en présentiel en septembre, on a réussi à les maintenir en septembre, et on a eu 800 personnes qui sont venues pendant nos 2 journées en septembre, essentiellement des collectivités, et qui avaient une très très forte demande, ce qui rejoint ce que je disais au début, de pouvoir échanger sur leurs pratiques, sur leurs expériences, sur les façons de faire et sur comment innover, et ce qui nous ramène aussi aux enjeux du décalogue sur des notions de service public, de transparence des financements, de culture, d'écoute des habitants, etc. Donc,
Geneviève, I'm sorry to have to kind of like pull you up and just stop you at that point, but I think that's
J'ai terminé. Je voulais juste conclure là-dessus et donc en disant qu'on maintient l'effort en 2021 et en tout cas on est très attentif à ces enseignements et ces étonnements de cette année 2020.
That's wonderful. Thank you for that. And I think that's a really positive way for us to start, really signaling, I think, some of the points that Emilia raised at the beginning in terms of the importance of solidarity as we move forward. Our next panelist is Mr. Achim Johansson, and he's the Senior Policy Officer, Governance, Democracy, Rule of Law Division at the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. And I'd like to build a little bit, Achim, on some of the points which Geneviève has just made, and particularly thinking specifically about cities. I think Geneviève talked about local government, but more specifically thinking about cities. The UN launched a report last summer that said that the COVID-19 crisis had been felt most hard in cities, and I'm interested with your kind of global experience as to how far you've been finding that in the countries in which you're working, and also what effects do you see that go beyond the health crisis, particularly?
Hello, everyone, and thank you very much, first of all, to UCLG and the CIB working group for organizing this important dialogue. As we in Germany, we are a member and longtime core funder of the Development Partners Network on Decentralization and Local Governance. I'm more than happy to join in. Let me take your 2 questions, Lucy, starting by the first one. What effects beyond the health crisis we observe? We see at least 3 other effects that I would like to briefly highlight. The first one is growing inequality worldwide, and inequality is growing now even more than before, caused by the COVID crisis, and it represents a huge challenge for social cohesion. And more than ever before, we need to address social sector needs in our development cooperation. The second effect beyond health is digitalization. we are observing how fast economies and societies are switching to digitalized processes, and we consider that to be both a challenge and an opportunity. We see the need to strengthen digitalization in public administrations in our country, but also in particular in our partner countries, including at local level. And we see the need to integrate this digitalization holistically in our development cooperation programming. Third effect that we see beyond health, that is that COVID-19 has put municipal finance under extreme pressure in our partner countries. Local revenue is decreasing, same as local economies. Government transfers are sometimes redirected, and at the same time, the costs for service provision increase, not least in order to meet hygiene standards. Debt is increasing, and the need to find additional financial sources is growing, while access to capital markets or tax revenue is getting more and more difficult. And we see the need that both national stakeholders and ourselves, the development partners, need to work on solutions to improve the local finance architecture during and after COVID-19. Before mentioning a few examples of what we are doing to meet these challenges, let me just combine it with your first question, Lucy, on cities. Well, we observe that both cities and local governments in rural areas are affected by the crisis. Well, if I look at information I get from our partner countries, it's quite diverse. So I wouldn't see a general line in now differentiating between these two categories. Both are affected, both need support in the areas mentioned. And we in German Development Cooperation definitely have both categories in our mind. So let me briefly say, well, not just mentioning the effects, but also that we are doing something. Digitalization, well, there it's quite easy, and I think projects that were based on real meetings now switch more to digitalized procedures. That's quite easy to explain, I think. But let me mention the inequality issue. As an example, we have a fund called Policy Coherence for Sustainable Development, Measure Inequality, and there we support selected partner countries to identify specific causes of inequality and to reduce these effectively. There we are particularly working together with Namibia, South Africa, and Vietnam, developing with those partners strategies and approaches to reduce inequalities. And this includes support to capacity development within the responsible ministries. And on the local finance architecture effect that I raised, let me mention a project example in Ghana, where our support for decentralization reforms project through a multi-level approach strengthens the coordination mechanisms between regional, local, and national stakeholders. And through the implementation of specific software for local revenue management, 43 partner districts increased their turnover on average by 66% within 3 years, admittedly before COVID. But our observation is that these effects remain important and become increasingly important in these times of crisis.
Joachim, I'm going to stop you there because I think you raised 3 incredibly interesting points. in terms of the kind of like the trends that you've been seeing in the field from your experience. And in the interest of time, I am going to move on to Thomas Gass, who's the Assistant Director General at the Swiss Development Cooperation. He's the head of South Cooperation at the Federal Department of Foreign Affairs, but he's also the co-chair of the Global Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation. And maybe, Thomas, just building a little bit on what Achim has been saying in terms of the trends, and recognizing that we've seen local government playing a very strong role in the front line of COVID. What do you now see needing to change in terms of the development assistance architecture to ensure that we can continue to maintain and support local government's role in this COVID recovery period as well?
Well, thank you very much, Lucy, and a warm greeting to all. It's always very inspiring for me to join this community, because we have this vision of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And actually we know that this 2030 Agenda and the SDGs will only happen if they become a social contract between the states and their people. And where does that happen, if not at the local level? That's why when we look at the effectiveness and the efficiency of development cooperation and of our partnerships, we have to ask ourselves constantly, are we strengthening the relationship between duty bearers and rights holders? And that is like a strategic test that we have to place to every project, to every program. And where better than to ask that than in the case of the local level, because we've actually seen through this COVID-19 crisis, we've seen how the trends that were already there about authoritarian and maybe centralistic approaches, how those were exacerbated, and how the civil space has been put under pressure. Sometimes because it's had to, sometimes because governments had to take centralized decisions. But we always need to be aware that part of our, part of the narrative, part of the strengthening of the social fabric goes through the capacities of the local authorities at various levels, and these authorities have to be strengthened. So for us, that is a very key thing. But the second point is just as important. When we had the first COVID lockdown in Switzerland, we had people lining up on the street in Geneva asking for handouts. Let's remember how, and Achim Jonathan also just said it, this crisis has really put our commitment to leave no one behind to the test. And so we need to go back to our approaches. And as was said yesterday in a UN meeting with UN Women and the Deputy Secretary General, we need to build back better and more equal. Not just better and more equal. And that means really checking our approaches to see whether we are sufficiently targeting vulnerable and left behind groups, the protection of human rights, civil society and media freedom, and as was said just now, digital instruments and solutions that actually connect and include people. You mentioned my role in the Global Partnership on Effective Development Cooperation, yeah. And I don't want to end without just saying, you know, this Busan partnership, as many people will call it, I just want to remind the 4 principles, because you'll see how relevant they are to this situation. Country ownership, inclusive partnerships, focus on results, and transparency and accountability. Now, tell me that there's no 4 principles that are as relevant as these in this current situation. And we're so pleased that UCLG and Oru Fogar, the United Regions Organization, the Forum of Regional Governments and Global Associations of Regions, are actually members of our steering committee, and they're actually bringing to bear all the strength of the local communities also to the reflections on how to make development effectiveness, to place it really at the center of our partnerships. This year in 2021, we will have a series of country-led action dialogues, and we really look forward to local communities through these partners being really a part of these dialogues to place the focus on local communities at the center of the dialogue. Thank you.
I think as a local government community, I think we would very much welcome the opportunity to be part of those dialogues. And I totally agree in terms of those principles. Those are things which are firmly at the heart of local governments and local communities. So thank you for just bringing that in and preempting a bit my second question. As we move along, we have a panelist now from Canada. So Mr. Shaharia Sawa, who's the Senior Analyst on Governance and Accountability at Global Affairs Canada. And Shaharia, maybe just building a little bit on some of the points that Thomas mentioned in terms of the role of women and the importance of making sure that we address the issues relating to women and girls. I think genuinely what we've seen from this crisis is that many of the effects have been felt most keenly by women and girls. And I'm very interested to know, and I know our audience are too, in view of Global Affairs Canada's feminist vision in terms of your development policy, to know how that's evolved with the COVID-19 crisis. And maybe you could share with us a couple of practical examples of how Global Affairs Canada has responded and made sure that those feminist commitments have been maintained in your development cooperation around COVID-19. Shaharia.
Thank you, Lucy, and hello everyone. This is a wonderful forum, and I've learned so much in the from the past few speakers. Thanks, Lucy, for the opportunity to talk about Canada's feminist vision. We're justifiably proud of being only the second country after Sweden to have a feminist foreign policy and a feminist international assistance policy, FIAP as we call it. And FIAP has over the last few years focused, or rather it has compelled Canada's assistance to look at everything through a gender lens. So any initiative that we plan or are asked to fund or asked to support, we first say, well, what is the impact on women? What are the particular specific issues that women and girls will face? What sort of results will it impact that will be affecting the lives and livelihoods of women? And as you observed and has been very well documented, this crisis has impacted women, girls, people of color, marginalized groups far more than anyone else. I think all of us in this forum are amongst the fortunate ones. And Canada's programming in the last few years has in fact already targeted these most vulnerable groups and has reached out to partner organizations and local governments that have a strong focus on women's issues. And we found that even the relief and the benefits of COVID-related assistance have not trickled down to the levels where they're expected to trickle down or where they're intended to trickle down. And so it's really caused a greater awareness of the need to strengthen the local government level. And we've done that through our partners, who is also your partner, FCM, as well as other organizations, Canadian and international, to build an enabling environment for greater women's voice and leadership, to focus on some of the more the stronger effects, such as sexual violence and gender-based violence, and addressing those aspects of women's concerns, as well as increasing women's voice and leadership within local contexts, both in the both by increasing women's political leadership, but also by increasing the proportion of women in public positions and public life. We also have one of our flagship initiatives, $150 million to women's voice and leadership across several different countries. We found that in the early part of the pandemic, our partners in women's voice and leadership across 33 different countries were able to get local partners mobilized, local governments as well as civil society mobilized, and create a platform for amplifying women's needs and women's priorities. By about middle of, incredibly agile, and just reflected on the fact that we had chosen some strong and articulate partners, very well engaged in their local milieu. The other thing that we've done internally for us is to strengthen our own processes and our own mechanism for delivering assistance, and to ensure that there is a GE, a gender equality lens, and integration process in every dollar of assistance or COVID relief that goes out. And we've made it easier across our department to ensure that this is integrated in all of our initiatives.
I think that kind of commitment at the local government, I'm going to stop you, Shahriar. I'm really sorry, because I know everyone's very interested in further kind of examples, but I think that, you know, that commitment to gender equality and maintaining that through this period, and to know that you're looking at continuing to kind of like focus on hearing the voice of women and girls in your planning, is something which is really important. And I know I'm going to hand over now to our next panelist, who is Bert Janssen. So he's coming at this from a slightly different perspective, and that he's much more of a local government practitioner. So I'm very interested, Bert, just in your reflections of what you've heard so far, but also, you know, bearing in mind the time of COVID-19 and the fact that we've only got 10 years left in terms of the Sustainable Development Goals. Do you feel that this crisis is really putting achieving those goals in serious jeopardy? And I know that you're also working on a new program yourself, and I'm just interested with what the other partners have said on this call as to some of the ways in which you're thinking about that differently in this COVID recovery period.
Okay, thank you, Lucy. Dear colleagues, I want to combine the international cooperation focus with the domestic approach to the SDGs in Flanders. I think that's something that we have been working on since 2015, together with our members, and we have had a track record on that. But then suddenly COVID-19 appeared, and it came. And after all the really direct suffering of the health crisis, also came a sense of first frustration and next of disbelief. First of frustration because you know, if the SDGs and Agenda 2030 would have been achieved already, we wouldn't have felt this negative impact of the COVID-19 crisis. I'm quite sure and certain of that. But after that frustration also came a sense of disbelief, because we felt that in the public opinion, the 17 goals were suddenly moved into or forgotten into a corner in the room, and weren't really that much on the forefront anymore. So the question you asked, Lucy, if COVID-19 has put a halt to the Agenda 2030, we had doubts, but I don't think that they are right anymore. I think that we have local, national and international actions to prove otherwise. I don't think COVID-19 can or could have stopped the SDGs and the Agenda 2030. Locally, on the local level, we in Flanders, we work every year on the week of the sustainable municipality, in which we provide a format for our members, for our local governments, to reach out to their citizens, to identify local heroes that are already working with these global goals in their own territory. So this year we did that campaign again, and focused on the people component of the SDGs, and tried to identify heroes that were in the front line of the COVID-19 crisis. 1 out of 3 of our 300 members of our 300 local governments in Flanders participated in that campaign. So I think at the local level, the SDGs are still on the agenda. I think we feel it, we can hear it, we listen to our members, and that's the case. On the national level, then again, you know, Flanders is in Belgium. Belgium is a complex, sometimes complicated country. We just came from a period of almost 500 days without a federal government. We have one now, so we are quite relieved. But I think in the policy documents that we have of that new ministers, or the new federal government, we read and reread the word sustainable and sustainability all the time. Sustainability as a principle, as a common principle for economic recovery, but also as a compass, as a moral compass for leaving no one behind. And I think that that's a very positive thing. It's the first time that we can read that much attention for sustainability and building a new and another world. And I think that this gives me hope. This also gives me hope in echoing the international echo. After the 5 Bs, we now have the 3 Bs, building back better, and I think that that's a very hope that we can implement. Now, with regards to our new program that we are trying to program for the next 5 years, starting in 2022, I have a couple of remarks. First of all, there's the remark of flexibility. We try to program city-to-city cooperation programs, and sometimes we tend to slide towards a technical exercise of logical framework, approaches of theory, of changes, of instruments and tools. But we need to have flexibility to adapt, to address situations like this, and to readdress budgets and actions and reformulate. Not everything that we can plan or program can be identified in logical frameworks, in indicators, or can be mitigated through risk definition beforehand. Second, I think we are very involved in city-to-city cooperations. Our members are as well. And this is very much a people relationship, a people cooperation. We do find it very difficult now, although digital tools can offer a solution for the moment, but we really do find that city-to-city cooperation is a relational cooperation between people, and that warm and informal contacts between those people, between the peers, between the people who are in front of local governments is at this point a bit lacking. So this is a conclusion or a constatation that city-to-city cooperation very much is a cooperation of people. Mm-hmm. I have 2 more slight remarks, small remarks. The third one.
And then I want to move on to the final speaker, because we're trying to keep as much time as we can. So go ahead quickly.
Okay, the third one is an opportunity. With the new federal government, we also have a new way of presenting our federal program. We have to, if we want to participate in development cooperation programs, we have to identify our program with a joint strategic framework per country. But instead of doing so, we identified a thematic one, and we are building with all the actors of the Belgian cooperation development cooperation. We are building a new thematic joint strategic framework of sustainable cities, in which we gather all actors, all civil society actors and associations like ours that are cooperating with local governments in the Global South. And then the last point is, and I want to end with that as a small hope, whereas we feared beforehand that COVID-19 would have followed a decrease in development cooperation budget. Our new federal government has announced that within the next couple of years, they want to increase the budget towards the the everlasting 0.7%. But at least after years of budget cuts, we have a slight hope of having budget increases on development cooperation. Okay,
that's great. Thanks, Bert, and thanks for that very practical kind of experience of thinking about the big picture and the domestic agenda, and then what you're now doing in terms of liaising with the development agency locally to be able to put in place some of your programs. And I think one of the things which I take away from that very strongly is really remembering the role of people, both in development, but also in the SDGs, and making sure that we keep people at the center of everything that we do. So our final panelist on this panel is Ms. Nakoya Martinez Beckström, who's the Senior Program Specialist Thematic Coordinator on urban development at the Unit for Global Cooperation on Environment at the Swedish International Development Cooperation Agency. That's a long one. We're going to be slightly changing our focus here, and we're very interested to hear a little bit from you in terms of your unit's focus on global cooperation on the environment. So obviously, we totally know that the agenda for sustainable development is central to your work. But how can we as a global community and as a global community of local government work with you towards a green, just and sustainable recovery? How do you see that manifesting itself?
Would I also be given an opportunity to say why we are cooperating with UCLG in this case?
You're preempting my second question.
Yeah, because that is also part of our response to this. I would like to start by saying that this whole experience of adjusting our way of working as in order to respond to COVID has also affirmed the need for following effective development cooperation principles. And I give credit to that for SIDA's ability to be able to respond rather quickly. Because as some of you may know, Swedish development cooperation is coursed through the multilateral system. A large part of that goes through UN and other EU coordination systems. And we also use as our default cooperation instrument, core or soft or programmatic funding. So what the advantages of that this has given to us is that we were able to immediately reach out to partners and to ask them what the situation would be and how within their own context they could reorganize their own activities and action plans to respond to the needs of COVID and the communities, right? So we managed to not just reallocate a number of existing resources, but we also managed to provide new resources for COVID response and recovery. And here, our experience, even from the perspective of my unit that's working with environmental issues, it became so clear that working with strengthening health systems, housing, transport, basic services, social protection systems and measures, this all became so integral in development cooperation. And also we started, really pushing up initiatives that were promoting human rights, democracy, gender equality, and non-discrimination and rule of law. So as you said, Agenda 2030 becomes an even more relevant framework for our efforts, because investing in achieving the SDGs is also investing in our recovery from COVID. And following global solidarity principles is also integral to get that scale and to be able to reach out to where support is needed the most. And we trust the existing multilateral mechanisms that have been set up. So in this sense, I'm very pleased, as my other colleagues have said, I'm very pleased that the Swedish government has affirmed the need for development cooperation and has affirmed a much stronger budget for development cooperation next year, with a stronger focus now on ending extreme poverty, climate change, protecting oceans, building more inclusive society, and all that. Going
maybe that leads me very nicely into my kind of final question for you, because this is about partnership. This conversation is very much about how we can learn from each other, but also how we can collaborate together. And I'm very interested that SIDA's entered into a partnership with UCLG. Yes. I think the partnership started in 2019. And I'm interested from a development organization's perspective, what you see as the benefits and the positives of working with the international municipal movement in actually sort of some of those commitments that you talked about in terms of leaving no one behind, in terms of implementing the sustainable development goals on the ground, and what you see a bit as your vision for that partnership going forward?
Yeah, so the experience has COVID only affirmed the reasons why we actually partnered with UCLG in the first place. So we entered into a 4-year agreement with UCLG, where the focus of our support is to support UCLG's efforts to influence, implement, and monitor the achievement of the SDGs, no, from the local context. But it's, for us, it's not just a matter of funding here, because as part of this partnership, we have what we call a programmatic arrangement, where we actually buy into the agenda, the strategies, and the priorities that UCLG members themselves set and that the leadership adopts. Yeah. Now we recognize, and it only affirms, 2 years into our partnership, it only affirms that UCLG is a very influential part of the global development community. And we value the fact that UCLG works to localize and contextualize all our aspirations around achieving the global principles, policies, and facilitating necessary actions. We also value the fact that UCLG prioritizes peer learning and capacity building, because that is not something that you can always do externally. The fact that you have the organization has built systems for municipalities and cities to learn from each other, to learn from good and bad examples, to learn from locally implemented innovations, for example. That for us is a very powerful role that you play. And also going back to being an influential political actor, we believe in local democracy and decentralization principles. And this is where UCLG is indeed pushing for this agenda.
Nayoka, I'm really sorry, I am going to have to stop you here, because I think that's a perfect moment to segue us into the next panel.
Okay.
I thank you for that kind of expression of the kinds of partnerships that we should really be moving towards. And I think that that really expresses for us the way in which we want to move forward. I'd like to really thank all of the panelists for your excellent contributions, for your reality in terms of the situation that we face in the COVID recovery, but also for your recognition of the role of local government in that recovery process and how we need to change and work together in order to be able to do that. And I think, Billy, I'm going to hand over to you now, and I think you have the opportunity with your panel to think forward in terms of some of those future scenarios. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy, and my compliments to you as a moderator. You're going to make me look very moderate with your excessive tight timekeeping. You pulled it back. Thank you very much. I'll jump straight into the second panel. We were starting to get there with some of Nayoka's responses, which was very welcome. Just by way of introduction, at the very beginning, Emilia made reference to the big breaks, for example, in international development in 2005, Paris, which we often forget in the Parisian debates, and of course, asking, is COVID like that? And we've seen the numbers go back in terms of increase in poverty. And the question is development assistance also going to go back? And that kind of frames the second panel. How is the crisis impacting on priorities within development cooperation policies? And what do future scenarios look like? What does the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years look like? These are key questions. All of us have seen some things in the last 8 months and have realized that COVID-19 has brought into sharp relief some practices and that we honestly need to address and pointed to some very, very big gaps. So let me start off by inviting Shipra Narang Suri, who's Chief of Urban Practices from UN Habitat, which of course is the UN agency with the urban mandate. If she would like to give us some introductory overarching comments, particularly as one of the hosts of this whole arrangement through the live learning experiences. Shipra, are you there?
Much. Yes,
Billy, I'm very much here. Can you hear me okay?
Loud and clear.
Those famous words. Can you hear me? Can you see me? Famous words of 2020. Thanks so much, Billy, and thanks, Emilia. Thank you to UCLG, the Capacity and Institution Building Working Group, Dialogue, Metropolis, and of course, the World Secretariat and all the colleagues present here. I think fundamentally, Billy, you've raised this, you've really put the spotlight on that question. Is development cooperation, is development assistance going to backslide? And this is a very real challenge for 2 or 3 reasons. Things that are not yet fully spoken about, perhaps, are not articulated enough. One, the limitations on movement and physical distancing have impacted our cooperation modalities. And we feel that while we have these platforms to interact more and more globally, the fear that we may be disconnected from our communities and from people on the ground, we don't work with them intimately enough and closely enough, is very real. And I think we need to be aware of that. Second, worldwide, the focus is shifting to emergency response, protecting and saving lives, which is all fine, but it has led to, as we know, centralization in many parts of the world. And in other parts of the world, an absolute dumping of huge responsibilities on local governments, which they were already struggling with before, and they are struggling with even more now. And the third thing that we feel is, there's a lot of talk about long-term structural recovery strategies, etc. But we are struggling to implement this, not just because the virus goes up and down and keeps coming back, but also, and the health emergency hasn't gone away, but also because fiscal stimulus is not being targeted enough to local governments and to local actors and to local. So I think development cooperation, the future of development cooperation must be thought through with those very, very real risks in mind. I'd say 3, 4 major things. One, at the risk of repeating ourselves, localization, localization, localization. I think we've seen that the response, the effectiveness of a response is directly proportional to the localization and contextualization and how much local actors are in the forefront of delivering that response. And I think that's something that I want to I will belabor that point. The second thing I think is, innovation. Again, we're talking about a lot of limitations, a lot of challenges. And we need to really talk about innovation, not in the sense of the smart city, glitzy perfume bottle buildings and AI everywhere, but really mundane innovation that helps the leapfrog from this current situation to a much more sustainable and inclusive future, which a lot of colleagues said on. Third, I think I will emphasize the importance of good knowledge and evidence. And by that, it's not just big data-based evidence, but evidence that combines spatial analysis, evidence that combines quantitative analysis, evidence that combines qualitative analysis, evidence that combines voices from the trenches. Because I think, again, we forget that is the real knowledge. And any development cooperation must be based on this kind of an evidence base and must invest in the evidence base. Going back to Nayoka's point just now, development cooperation must invest in building that evidence base. And finally, we heard Achim mention in the first panel, others, the point about improving the financial architecture. We need new sources of financing. Emilia mentioned expansion. Fundamentally, this crisis has shown that it is lack of adequate housing and lack of public services, which has brought us to our knees. And to expand access to public services and expand access to adequate housing, we don't just need technical assistance, we need real money. And that real money, new sources of funding, new financial architecture, new decentralized cooperation and decentralized financing mechanisms for local governments need to be put into place if we are to really do this leapfrog. And of course, finally, all of this needs to be set in the whole conversation around multi-level governance, the whole discussion around inclusive multilateralism, the seat at the table, the voice in the decision making, the voice in the policy making. So all of this is framed within that context. But I think these are my first thoughts on what we need going forward.
Thank you, Shipra, and bang on 5 minutes, which was the the unofficial target that you'd been set. So I think you felt it. Against that background, many points, but the big one that you mentioned that I think we all recognize is we've seen a huge sucking up to the center, to the centralization that's happened. And so I think it's entirely appropriate we now go immediately into the regional level and to ask Ms. Carme Gual, if I've got your name right, is director of the Catalan Agency for Regional Development, which is, of course, a regional funder for development cooperation. And just to ask, what does this impact, what's the impact on you? What are your programs for the next few years? And does it change your partners that you're going to be working with as you come out of this crisis? Over to you.
Hello, thank you very much. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. And I think that Shipra has said really very, very focused things. So I think that it's very difficult to add some more things to that, because I really was just very straight. Just the first idea is that given the emergency, the human rights and the SDG, in my opinion, remain fully in force, since they can be a compass to overcome the current crisis and improve our resilience as a humanity and to benefit the planet. But there are several areas that the pandemic has confirmed us as a key drivers for development for cooperation. In fact, we were in a shift to a new master plan last year. So we already became asking for some kind of bigger alliances and not only working with NGOs, you know, trying to find this kind of more capacity building between public administrations, reinforcing that the pandemic just showed us that we were really trying to do the right thing. So so it's been pushing us to go forward on this idea. So first good news is, like, for our budget for 2021 will be maintained or even increased. So that's a good news. These are good news. Of course, there are several things that have already been said. We will have to stop traveling, so we must focus much more on the work on the communities and on our partners. So we've been doing it a lot, but it's going to be much stronger now. And then I think that we are seeing more our role as a facilitator, not so much as donors or executors of programs, but to creating the place where things happen and many stakeholders can get together and create alliances for bigger impact. And to create this kind of, you know, evaluating what's going on, then trying to find evidence, and then adapt proposals for greater impact. Another issue that I wanted to focus on is that we are reaffirm ourselves as in our gender approach, as the evidence of the facts are very clear. Women and vulnerable populations have suffered in a much more acute and cruel form the crisis. Human rights must be protected, and as a priority area, we must increase the fight against gender-based violence as lockdowns and mobility restrictions have aggravated. We have more humble means than Canada, but we are also really centered on this, putting all actions through the lenses of gender approach. So on human rights defenders, we have also been extremely exposed and as a company. So we will increase our human rights defenders protection program. Also, we will work on the Observatory for Business and Human Rights. So just in order to start really focusing on the coherence of policies and trying to put business not as usual, but on human rights. So on the other side, we will focus on this kind of holistic approach to resilience. This has already been said about evidence-based decision-making, competition and diversity. So recentering the priorities for next years on food security and agriculture, health, and environmental and sustainability, understood in this kind of triple social, economic, and environmental dimension. So in this sector, I would like to go a little deeper. It's just we made a diagnosis last year, and there's this idea of creating this kind of alliance between the sector of environmental business and world, and also the development cooperation that's not, they are not working together. So I think that's very, very important to make them, to create this kind of spaces where to inspire new alliances and work together. Then we would like to talk a lot on technology. I think that's very relevant, and we have been making some kind of seminars and meetings just to try to focus our NGOs and also to create this kind of interaction with the technology sector that has many issues involving our future. And then another very important issue is that we are trying to make like priority on sports as centering just to inspire again a new kind of synergies to go for a safer and peaceful communities. So and we think that sports, that's something that comes with the Kazan plan with UNESCO, and we are also trying to go deeper on that. So then there's another action is like this kind of intercity cooperation that's very fundamental. It's been already, but for us it's like bigger need right now. So it's we have to secure this kind of local economic resilience, and we bolster our direct cooperation with regions and cities in Mediterranean and Africa areas, improving our programs related to social and solidarity economy and the creation of economic activity for youth and women, as we have already consolidated relationship in Latin America, but more in relationship with peace and guarantee of non-repetition, like in Colombia, Guatemala, or El Salvador.
Thanks, Carmen. I'm going to have to thank you. It's a very clear list of priorities, but most importantly, underscored, as you said at the beginning, by a good budget outlook, which is wonderful to hear.
Yeah.
And so it's not everywhere has that joy.
Yeah, no.
So we're now going to go back to a theme it's emerged a couple of times, which is what COVID-19 did was sort of shift the balance towards the humanitarian in the short term, away from long-term multi-year programming. Hardly surprising, but how do we get back, or do we get back to multi-year programming? Lex Getz is from the Stabilization and Humanitarian Aid section, which is appropriate of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the Netherlands. And so if I can ask you to look at that topic, and also, is it a slogan when we say build back better? What does this mean? How do we actually achieve something as difficult as that? Over to you, Lex.
Thank you very much, Billy, and thank you very much to the UCLG for this opportunity. I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to join in this panel. Thank you so much. On your questions, yes, the issue of multi-annual programming, that is indeed a challenge. It's of course quite clear, as we heard today already many times, the pandemic is a game changer, also for development cooperation. But of course, it's also important to recognize that this crisis is not the only changing dynamic. Many other things are changing, politics, power balances, networks, means of communications. And the reasons for these changes are also quite diverse, whether it's conflict, climate change, new political priorities, etc. So in our response to changing dynamics, which of course includes the current pandemic, in our view, two things are key. First, we have to be agile and proactive in our analysis. And second, we also have to be flexible in our willingness and our ability to adapt to changing circumstances. And that is what we are at the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs are trying to do. We are in regular communication with our partners. We regularly test the validity of our political economy analysis. We are strengthening our own learning agenda, and we work more closely than ever with our knowledge partners and institutions. And we try to adapt our programming in consultation to the changing circumstances. And of course, it is important to ensure that adaptive programming does not lead to erratic programming. We need to continue to be a reliable and trustworthy partner in these times, especially now. And that's definitely true for the long and difficult processes of governance, where there's not a silver bullet. So we really have to establish ourselves as a trustworthy partner. And that's why at the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we try also to set up as many partnerships as possible. We don't see people as our beneficiaries of our programming. We try to see them as partners, and we try to establish a dialogue with our partners, and a dialogue in which we can also adapt and adjust to new circumstances. Now, a word on the second part of your question on building back better. Of course, the current crisis has brought us many negative things. For the first time in about 10 years, poverty is on the rise, and the challenge is huge. And we have already heard a lot about that today. We are further away than we were for reaching the SDGs by 2030. And then, of course, the agenda is large, and we heard many things about it today. I would like to highlight one aspect, if you allow me, and that is, in our view, more than ever, country-specific assessments should really guide our efforts for recovery, for protection, and for a sustainable way forward. And working with local actors, including civil society organizations, is key to enhancing resilience, ownership, and effectiveness. And for our own international cooperation program, we are trying to apply this notion of localization or building on local resilience as much as possible. And for us, it has 3 components. First is we are continuing to invest in making the quality and inclusiveness of governance, national and local, and trust between government and citizens key to the implementation of the SDGs. And I think our Swiss colleague was talking about that. We talk about the social contract as a crucial issue for achieving the SDGs. Second, southern organizations, civil society or not, and the private sector should be more decisive in identifying specific policy approaches aimed at maximizing impact on the ground. And thirdly, we try to get international organizations such as the United Nations to join in this preferred direction as much as possible. Again, let me thank you very much for this opportunity, and I look forward to the other speakers. Thank you. Back to you, Willy. I think you are mute.
You'd think I'd have learned that by now after 10 months of doing it, but let me just editorialize and thank all of our speakers for so diligently keeping to time. We're actually catching up, but thanks, Lex, for those very clear comments. So we now go back to Sweden, to Jenny Jansen-Pierce from SKL, and we've been talking about partnerships and the importance of localization, but thus far we haven't really addressed something that's right in the middle of all of our discussions, which is, in so many cases, is the weakness of local capacity. And this is something that the SKL focuses on. So what impact has the crisis had on your capacity building programs? And in the course of this crisis, have the needs of your beneficiaries changed? Jenny?
Thank you very much, Billy. And for those of you who don't know me or my organization, just to clarify that we are also a part of the Swedish Association of Local Authorities and Regions. And also, thank you very much for being invited to talk on this panel. It's been extremely interesting to hear all the other interventions so far. And just to start off on your question, we did, when we set our strategy and our annual planning for next year, we went back and sort of evaluated the year a little bit to see how has both our priorities and the background or the setting that we work against changed. And one of the realizations that became very clear to us then was that this past year has really strengthened us in our why as an organization, or what we do. And of course, this is something that's been mentioned by many of you already before here, that the role of local governments in dealing with this global crisis and the effects and the role to prevent long-term both economic and society effects of the COVID-19 it's become very clear for us. And I think it's something that has been brought up on the development agenda as well. And so for us, the focus looking forward has been really to continue to deliver and keep our eye on the overall goal, but not by changing why we work or what we do, but more how we do it. And many of you have already mentioned digitalization as a way of that we all have had to take huge leap forwards, everything from learning how to unmute ourselves before we start speaking, but also just having these sorts of panels and meetings and trying to get the best out of it. And in the beginning, I think for our capacity building programs and for all of our programs, we tended to look at the limitations that came with this. But we can also now see that it's been quite a lot of positive effects. One example that I have is from our project in Ukraine, where we've worked with the newly amalgamated municipalities there, and an association that gathers all of these municipalities, where we've had to take the capacity building programs and meetings and so on and digitalize them. And one effect has been that more municipalities have been able to take part of the programs that the local authority association that we work with have provided. So there's actually been reaching more people and more municipalities. But on the other hand, as I think Achim mentioned in the beginning, you see the limitations and the digital gap that has also become very clear that is something that we need to work with, especially looking forward. But I think on the question on how we make sure that the programs still reach the same or better results, and how they are, how we take into account the changing needs of the beneficiaries, I think there's really just two key elements. And one is to have strong partnerships, and the other one is flexibility. And this is really what's been gone through as a leading or guiding light for us. And we see that in many of our projects, there are long-term projects where we work for many years, and we have solid and strong partnerships, both with local authorities and with in sometimes municipalities that we work with. It's been so much easier than to together meet the challenging new circumstances and not being able to meet, but to work on digitalization and also adapting to new needs, because that means that we can also be flexible in the activities and listen to, okay, what is actually needed in this circumstances. And when it comes to flexibility, of course, here we've heard from some people of the speakers representing the donor community. I mean, this is something that is very important, to have the flexibility without going or being adaptive without going erratic. I think you, if I quote you correctly, Lex, and I think that's very good, because it means that you can adapt what you're doing with the activities, but you still have to keep the eyes on the overall goal. One example is from our project in Colombia, where gender equality has been part of the goals, so one of the focus areas. And as you all know, during the pandemic, the increase in domestic violence or violence against women has increased rapidly. And there we could meet the needs from the municipalities that we work with, and did together with them a campaign reaching out in the new ways that was needed now to women on how they could get support and how to stop this. So
thanks, Jenny.
Yeah,
do you want to wrap up? Are you done?
I think I can just wrap up with saying that this the flexibility, and especially the strong partnership we had, that has been very good in this during this period. When we look forward and starting new programs with new partners, it's a whole different challenge in how do we do that during the circumstances that we have now when we can't travel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that last comment, because you're one of the few speakers who've actually extolled some of the virtues of being not able to travel, and we've all benefited from it. I don't know, I'm not at the forefront of wanting to get back on planes, but we will see. So we come to our last speaker, and this is very interesting because what we've all seen in the last 10 months is how COVID-19 has sort of sucked the oxygen out of the room, and we've not noticed anything else. And of course, behind it is we still have the existential crisis, which is of course the climate emergency facing us. So Hiroyuki Ito is the manager of the Green Action Plan for EBRD. And so the questions to you are, what has been the impact of COVID-19 on your work program? And has the green agenda got rolled back and pushed back by COVID-19, or has it created a new space? What are the next steps? So over to you, Hiroyuki, a small topic.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Billy. Thank you for inviting me to this webinar today. It's been very interesting listening to all the speakers. As part of my job, I work with more than 40 cities in Central Asia, Eastern Europe, Central Europe, and North Africa to help them develop a 5-year action plan to improve environmental qualities through investment projects, policy measures, and other initiatives. When COVID was sort of spreading across the region, I was concerned that this program will be significantly affected. However, this wasn't particularly the case, and I would like to share 4 observations from this experience. The first point is that green continues to be the top priorities for EBRD and many cities that we work with. Many cities are now actually finding many reasons to accelerate green agenda forward. Let me give you an example. Tirana in Albania, they are taking advantage of the situation of reduced traffic and converting road lanes and parking space into what's called a pop-up bicycle lanes and expanding pedestrian zones and expanding park area for citizens to relax and exercise in a more non-crowded manners. So this is a very positive sign. And also more importantly, green is very important because government needs to find ways to stimulate economy and create jobs. And green urban infrastructure project is seen as a good means to achieve these goals. This year alone, despite a difficult time for infrastructure operators, EBRD managed to provide financing for metro subway projects in Poland and upgrading tram system in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So this is a good evidence that the green agenda is still being prioritized, and EBRD will continue to work with partners and to support cities. The second point I would like to share is, as many of you mentioned today, is we are prioritizing the digital transformation. From our perspective, this comes from the situation where many of our utility operators and in the region are struggling from loss of revenues or increased management costs due to changes in the demand patterns of infrastructure. So they really need to find ways to make things more efficient. Things like the digital smart meters, ticketing, and things like that will also have a positive public health benefit. The third point is we are changing the way how we engage stakeholders and work with partners. So from workshops, face-to-face workshops are now converted into webinars, but we are exploring other ways such as online surveys, which actually manages to reach out to a much wider group of stakeholders than before. We set up social media pages. We use that more efficiently these days. For example, Kiev Green City Action Plan has a Facebook page where people can post and communicate more efficiently. That's a positive change. And also we set up what's called a knowledge sharing platform for member cities to exchange ideas and lessons learned. Just like Emilia said at the start of the discussion today, communities. So we are trying to build a communities of cities to support each other. Also, we are putting more emphasis on private sector involvement. We try to structure the infrastructure project with support from companies such as publicly financed initiatives, concessions, and other PPP mechanisms to bring in more funding from the private, and also to support city with additional expertise. The last point is resilience. So we are taking a more holistic approach to what resilience means beyond climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction. We are now looking more into the social fabric of cities, such as greater access to services, access to education, access to sustainable food, particularly for vulnerable people and for women. So those are some of the observations I like to share today. And
thanks,
I'm not
Hiroyuki.
too optimistic. Yes, thank you.
Optimistic.
I'm optimistic, yes.
We like people who end when they say they're optimistic. That's very good.
Thank you.
Let me just confirm my last speaker now comes is Marlene Simeon, who's the director of Platforma in Brussels. And we're going to rely on her experience and insight to give us a perspective on potential shifts of priorities within EU development cooperation arising out of this crisis. And two specific questions. Are we likely to see better cooperation between the member states and the European institutions? I think this is called Team Europe. Is that likely to happen? And of course, for this audience, what are the implications for local government? Over to you, Marlene. I think you are presenting en français.
Yes, but actually I will speak in English. It will be easier. Sorry for that.
Whatever's easiest for you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Billy. Well, actually, I will split into two, maybe this intervention, because I wanted to speak also about what is the impact of the crisis on our day-to-day activities, and it's mostly at the other set, but it's mostly to review all our the members' activities on training and study visits, peer reviews, and move into virtual. But for us, it's also about the advocacy, because we are a pan-European coalition doing advocacy towards EU institutions. And that was also one of our main objectives. Just after the crisis outbreak, we started also shifting our advocacy activities. And what we could observe is that going virtually helped us also to reach out more people in the EU institutions and to be able to dialogue more with different units in the DG DEFCO and in other external service, for instance. So it was a little bit positive in the end to move towards this virtual work of the association. On the types of action that we have developed indeed, so this advocacy was mainly toward this new concept of the European Union on Team Europe. So it's indeed to increase the cooperation between member states and the EU institution and the European Commission on the ground at country level. And what our aim was to ensure that local and regional governments will be involved in the response of the EU on the ground in this Team Europe, and that local and regional governments will be involved in the dialogue at country level. It was mentioned before, I think by Shipra, about this recentralization processes that is implied by the crisis and the lockdown and the measures. So it was important for us to remind the institution that the response must include the local level and not remain at the national level. We also try to follow the impact on the funding for development cooperation, for decentralized cooperation. Well, we could see and hear today that the impact is not the same everywhere, and but there will be an impact on some funding for decentralized cooperation, and especially at EU level, we don't know yet how decentralized cooperation, for instance, will be financed and with which budget. So this is a big question of the coming weeks. Now it's still in negotiation, but that will be one of our main focus now. The EU global response was mainly focusing on the immediate health needs. But now it also has this long-term perspective based on 5 main priorities. So digitalization, the Green Deal, because there is a Green Deal for Europe, but there is a part which includes green diplomacy and a Green Deal outside the EU, also to promote this outside the EU. The third priority is about the economy that works for all and the relation with inequalities there as well. Local governments have a role to play, human rights, gender equalities, and migration and the specific role for refugees and migration in this in the framework of this EU development policy. So yes, member states and the European Union are acting together under Team Europe. Tomorrow, for instance, we have a meeting with the commissioner dedicated to international partnership with the civil society organization. But again, we have to repeat the same also messages that local and regional governments and the national associations must be involved in the EU global response. The idea is there, but then we need to see the concrete modalities for the next year. I don't know if I have some more time, but otherwise I stop here, really. Thank you.
No, you did a great job. Thank you very much in record time, but a complex situation. Thank you all the panelists. That was extraordinarily rich in I think it was 45 minutes. And we covered so many themes. I'm not going to attempt to summarize, but clearly we are getting ready to think about the shift back from the short term towards the long term. And at the same time, I hope we're also going to ask what lessons did we learn from COVID? The impact of exclusion at a local level in particular has been really brought into sharp focus through the health crisis. So I'm going to thank you all and hand back the baton to Emilia, I believe.
Thank you very much, Billy. Yes, thank you for a great job that you have done. And you have been extremely correct and not putting the agenda of Cities Alliance into the discussion, but I cannot resist. We don't have you with us that often. 2 minutes to summarize how the agenda of Cities Alliance is impacted by this. Cities without slums being the most hit by this. What do you expect? All of that in 2 minutes.
Thank you. Even better, no notice. For us, this crisis has made very clear. Stop the search for magic and for silver bullets. It's the old divisions and questions of choice. And I want to come back to this question of choice. When we look at cities and we look at small cities throughout Africa, and we see people excluded from the land markets, excluded from services, not being provided for by local governments. And the response of so many practitioners and outsiders is to say, that's driven by poverty. And we, of course, recognize that it is also driven by poverty, but it's first and foremost a question of choice. It is choices openly made by public authorities, national and local, and by elites, social elites, political elites, other kinds of elites. And we are not going to fix, a health crisis. The key point about it, it cannot be isolated in the same way that you can keep apart the non-provision of services for a period. But COVID-19 at least demonstrated the universality of the developmental challenge. If we haven't learned that lesson, we've missed a huge, huge lesson. So we put, again, the solutions are well known in terms of getting the urban poor as part of city development, as equal partners in whole city developments. It doesn't mean that we haven't learned anything new, but the fundamentals are in place and are as radical as they ever were, and we now have to implement them. And so I believe it's really reinforced, and not our mandate, but our understanding of what constitutes change and transformation. I think, and I end by linking this straight back to the 2 key points that have come up, is the inequality and the return to the climate issue. And I don't believe we can resolve the climate crisis without simultaneously reducing inequality. It's a precondition. And until we understand that, we're not going to change our cities. C'est tout. 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Billy. But I think it really wraps up very nicely the two panels that we have had, and it leaves Peter Knip, the chair of our CIB working group, and then our treasurer, Mary Bravanovic, mayor of Kitchener, with a very tough job now to provide some additional closing remarks. I'm going to start with you, Peter, the director of VNG International, and as I said, chair of the CIB committee. How did we do, Peter? What are you bringing back to your day-to-day work?
Yeah, thank you, Emilia. Thank you to all. Let me
come a bit closer to the microphone,
yeah, okay.
Peter.
Is this better?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Hey, let me first of all say that I really miss you to meet you in the different international meetings. And well, this is an alternative for sure, a good alternative, but not the best. So I look forward to 2021 to meet you again physically. Thank you, Emilia, for the possibility to say a few words at the end of this meeting. First of all, I'm very glad that my secretariat was able to bring so many people around the table today. So my congratulations to them and thank you for your participation. As you have seen, the program announced a wrap-up from my side. But well, I'm inclined to say the sessions, the contributions of you were too rich to just summarize. It might be also a bit boring to repeat everything that has been said. What I can announce is that there will be a full report of all the contributions, and it will be sent to all participants. Having said that, just a few sentences. First thing, Emilia, is that I really embrace the idea how you and UCLG, the board of presidents, is working on a pact on the future under the titles "The Cities Are Learning." Cities are listening instead of listen to the cities, which, by the way, we shouldn't lose this message. Of course, the world should listen to the cities, but this reverse is, in my view, very important because in my work, I also meet too many situations where cities do not listen enough to their constituencies, do not listen enough to the needs of all their citizens. When I heard the discussions today, I feel that we share, as local government world and as donors, a lot of common values. The public domain is really back. And there is a responsibility for all of us to improve the functioning of the public domain in the interest of the development of people. I'm inclined to say that what you said today reflected, in fact, what we as practitioners responsible for international programs, responsible for international policies of our associations and cities, what we really observed in the past period. The needs of our partners changed, the thematic priorities changed, and the instruments of cooperation changed. And we see it as our responsibility to adapt ourselves, our programs, our activities to the new realities, and to contribute to building back better and to say innovation in our field of work. And for sure, equal service delivery, fighting inequalities, fighting discrimination, as well as safeguarding the participation of all, is at the heart of the challenges of local governments everywhere in the world. And we won't do this adaptation adjustment in isolation. We would like to do it in close cooperation with the donors, with the business community, the NGOs, and the knowledge institutions. Last but not least, let me thank the organizations that financed the work of the CIB to enable us to bring the practitioners together. So thanks to UCLG, which is a very important funding source to do this work, to the Canadian Association, FCM, and I'm glad that Barry is going to say a few inspiring words at the end. I would like to thank the city and the province of Barcelona, as well as my own association, which contributed to our work as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Peter. I always find it very strange when you mention UCLG as if it wasn't you, because you are very much UCLG. But
I know,
yeah.
But I mean, if you wouldn't make the political choice to say, save some money for this type of work, we couldn't do it.
Yeah, no, this is true, and we have everything to owe to our presidency. This has been several presidencies that have decided to make that choice. I am very happy to say also to partners that are here that this is really a decentralized activity, that it's our members that are carrying it out, and I think that gives it also an additional added value. I think overall, Peter, this has been a lot of good food for thought for the next meeting we have of the CIB, which is going to be looking at programming for next year. So I think it has been very rich and inspiring. Another truly inspirational speech comes from another part of our presidency, from our treasurer, the mayor of Kitchener, Barry Brabanovic. Barry, we are really very happy to have you with us. Following you, we're going to have our video to explain the Pact for the Future, but please share with us your vision on the work that we are facing, on development cooperation and more, on behalf of the presidency as well.
Absolutely. Thanks, thanks a million, Amelia, and thank you to Peter. Both of you have certainly put a lot of pressure on in terms of the expectation of my comments. But I do want to begin just before I do as Peter did to say how nice it is to at least see people virtually, because I know for all of us the past 9 months, in some cases a little longer, have been very difficult. And not being able to connect in person with each other has been unfortunate, because I find while a lot of our great work happens in meetings, even some of the better work often happens in the informal social interactions that we have in the hours, in the evenings and so on, when we have an opportunity to collaborate and work together. But, you know, none of this would be possible, quite frankly, if Amelia, you and your team at UCLG, and yes, it is all of us, but credit needs to be given where credit is due, made a decision early on in the pandemic that this work is more important than ever, and we needed to pivot in order to continue this work and to continue it with passion and zest to support our members, our member municipalities and our member associations around the world. And so thank you and kudos to you and of course BNG and FCM and two wonderful partners who lead this particular committee. Thank you to everyone for your contributions to the discussion today. I think we all know that cities have been at the forefront of local or at the forefront of COVID response, and have demonstrated that the need for local and regional governments to deliver effective programs has never been more important. Local governments, in fact, worldwide are involved in many forms of effective development cooperation and partnerships. And I think what this pandemic has showed is the importance of that, but also not just the importance of collaboration and partnership between local governments, but the importance of collaboration and partnership between the different spheres of government. In Canada, depending on what part of the country you live in, we have 3 to 4 spheres if you consider our national and our provincial governments. But in other countries it might be 2 or 3. But the reality is, it has never been more important for these spheres of government to be aligned and to work collaboratively together. Local governments bring a unique perspective to development cooperation. Their contribution yields tangible results that improve daily life in developing countries. The pandemic has shown the importance of these coordinated efforts, with national governments, bilateral donors, multilateral financial institutions and organizations, as well as local and regional governments coming together to hold policy dialogues on development cooperation, and also to engage in meaningful development work. Sessions such as the one today have provided an opportunity to engage in that dialogue with donors and national governments to ensure that the needs and concerns of local governments are both understood and supported. Municipal international cooperation initiatives must be well coordinated and developed within national pandemic strategies. These aren't a nice to have, these are a must have, and they must have taken into account the priorities of the local level and the full diversity of the community being heard by promoting participatory processes in the development cooperation being done. Partnerships between local organizations, donors, and other key stakeholders, such as civil society, are necessary in order to implement effective and coordinated cooperation programs. The need to make sure our resources are being used wisely is more important than ever. Making our cities and communities inclusive, sustainable, safe, and resilient ultimately makes our countries inclusive, sustainable, safe, and resilient. All of us as local governments are ready to do our part to strengthen our respective countries' futures. And we are asking all levels of government to join our global municipal movement toward a collective, sustainable, and inclusive future. I always have right behind me, just to keep in mind the importance of all of it, my sustainable development goals soccer ball that I got at the UN. And it reminds me of the importance of the work that we do, but also of the importance of the collaboration, the relationships, and the partnerships that we all share globally. So as we come to an end of 2020 and to a 2021 that hopefully will look much different and in many ways much better than this year, certainly can't get more challenging or worse, I think. We all recognize that more effective investments in international cooperation are going to be key as we build back better going forward. So thank you, everyone. The best of the upcoming holiday season to you. And again, thank you, Emilia, VNG, and FCM for putting this event together.
Well, thank you very much, dear Mayor Treasurer. We are going to watch now this 2-minute video. Stay around. Many of you have seen it, our membership, but some of you haven't, and it explains very quickly what we think, what we have in mind for this Pact for the Future. Think about how you can contribute to shape it.
In the largest gathering of the municipal world in Durban, eThekwini in 2019, mayors and governors from United Cities and local governments understood that they had a historical opportunity to deliver a new model anchored in the territories. The municipal movement presented itself to the next decade stronger than ever, embracing its origins, safeguarding local democracy and loyal to the values and principles of decentralization, gender equality, self-government, and accountability. 2020 started by delivering the transformative vision for our people and the planet. Then the world stopped. The way we all relate to each other radically changed, perhaps forever. Our cities and territories would never be the same. The COVID-19 pandemic is a magnifying glass that highlights who and what we are leaving behind. What do we mean by the commons? What should our commons mean? Who cares for us? Who do we need to care for? No single actor can bring change alone. In this tragedy, we have found the reasons to keep working as guardians of the dreams of our communities, as global actors with transformational and convening power. We might not know what is coming, but we know what we need to do. Municipalism is the proof that there is another way of going about politics. This challenge can become a foundational moment for our world that bridges local actions and global trends. A world that guarantees equal access to public basic services. A world that has developed an ecological transformation. A world driven by the next generation of human rights. A feminist world that cares and thrives with girls, women, boys, and men that are equally empowered. A world based on solidarity. United Cities and Local Governments, an equality-driven movement, is committed to facilitating the space for local and regional leaders to make this world a reality. We need to do it for the future, with the governments, with the people, with the planet.
Thank you, everybody. Stay healthy. Invest in local government. Invest in each other. Bye.
Increase